What now? Is the sky falling or is a recovery possible? We will discuss all of that with all of you here on Notre Dame Live, right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate Brian Driscoll making this all possible. Catch Brian for the deep dive each and every day and the rest of the crew there at Irish Breakdown. Brian, you're still breathing. You've survived. You're still here. Maybe that's an indicator of other football fans and how they should recover from these games, but it's not everybody's approach. But
I didn't lose this weekend. So wasn't my well, some people think it was my fault, but it wasn't my fault they lost. But it was tough. It was a tough weekend. It's a tough weekend. Not only did they lose, but then I couldn't enjoy Michigan losing as much because couldn't really say anything to Michigan because, at least they got beat by a good team, or, Northern Illinois is a good team, but at least they got beat by a team that you would understand them getting beat by.
All right, Brian. I do my best to prepare for this show and all shows, but I'm up to 16 of these a week. So I got to say that I wasn't making Northern Illinois a priority on my viewing list as I try to watch 2 games at noon, 2 at 3:30, 2 at 7. And I got to say, on another note, that 2:30 Eastern time start time for Notre Dame on NBC forever has always tripped me up because, again, I'm in that mode, especially since I started these channels of noon, 3:37, and I'll see the Notre Dame score run across the bottom of the screen sometime in the second quarter and be like, oh yeah, they're playing Pitt today. Looks like it's a decent game. Let's get over there and check it out. So what I saw was Riley Leonard throw an awful pick and set up because I was scrambling to get to the Notre Dame game and pulling away from whatever I was watching at the time to see Riley Leonard interception, and then what is generally considered an exceptional Notre Dame defense give up ground to set up a game-winning field goal.
Well, first of all, the good news, you don't have to worry about any 2:30 kickoffs this year, Eastern time. So fortunately, they're all their kickoffs this year are Eastern time. Or 3:30 Eastern time. So that's fortunate because it would screw me up, Mark, because I would be like, wait a minute, what time are we heading to the stadium today? Is this a 2:30 or 3:30? Because they would do both. It'd drive me nuts. But it was, if you think about it, Mark, it was the exact opposite of last weekend. Right? Last weekend, late in the game, A&M ties it up and your defense makes a stop. Your offense gets rolling. Finally, they get a score. Your defense makes another stop. Your special teams puts the game away with a field goal. All 3 phases of the game made plays for you to win that football game. You then fast forward a week later against Northern Illinois, and you have the offense sputters the whole game, but they throw the late pick. Your defense then lets them go on a 5-minute drive, converting, I think, 2 third downs and a 4th down to get into field goal range to make the kick. And then I don't really put it on the special teams as far as the 62-yard field goal because that kid should have never been put in position to kick a 62-yard field goal. That's outside his range. There's more that should have been done. They didn't handle the clock well on that series. But, look, they had a shot to maybe have a miracle, and they couldn't get it done. And every phase of the game that just couldn't get it done, Mark. And it was a very fitting end for how the game went. The offense couldn't make plays. The defense couldn't stop Northern Illinois when they needed to, and Northern Illinois dominated them in the trenches on both sides of the ball. That's the most stunning thing from the entire weekend. And when you think about a loss like that, sometimes, Mark, you and I have been covering football a long time. There's those weird games where just the ball wasn't bouncing your way that day. If anything, the ball bounced Notre Dame's way a decent amount in that game. Think about the muffed kickoff at the beginning. They just flat out got beat. There was no, this fluky play and that fluky play, and you could maybe toss that first seam route. But that was just about Northern Illinois kicking Notre Dame's butt. That's what it was about. And that's probably the most sickening feeling from the whole thing is that right there, is that they flat got dominated.
And that is the tough thing to swallow about this game. But this is not isolated to this team and against this level of opponent. Some of the early season struggles at Florida State and a few other scares have been not fluky plays, not 0 for 3 on field goals, special teams gaffes, but there have been a lot of power teams that I've seen this year inexplicably get manhandled or at least suffer a stalemate against a team that you would assume there is a huge talent advantage over and a strength and conditioning advantage over at the line of scrimmage. And you're expecting, okay, we're into the third quarter now, and now the fourth quarter, it should be taking over in regards to the better program and the better team, and it hasn't happened. And I hate to experience another college football season, and because you know what the overreactions are, and say, "Wow, this season's crazy," because I don't necessarily think that's the case. We can go through the first 2 weeks of many seasons and say X, Y, and Z happened, which was unexpected, but focus more on Notre Dame. Uh, because it was a physical stalemate or getting beat up front for much of the game. I got to think that your takeaway is much different than it would have been had Notre Dame outgained. Like I watched the Arkansas-Oklahoma State game. Arkansas just bludgeoned them up front on both sides of the ball, racked up 650 yards of offense to 385. They were clearly the dominant team physically, but just blew it. But that wasn't the case here. And you would expect that would have had to have been the case for a Notre Dame to lose to a Northern Illinois.
I'm not often speechless, Mark, but like in this one I am. I mean, you could say, okay, well, even if that's the case, shouldn't Notre Dame be better athletically to where they at least go and make enough plays where, yeah, maybe it was a closer game than it should have been. Perfect example, Penn State, Bowling Green. I mean, Penn State had a very clear letdown game after going on the road in a bit of a growing rivalry, tough opponent against West Virginia. Some people thought maybe West Virginia could pull off the upset, and they gave it everything they had to come back, and they had a letdown game. They weren't locked in against Bowling Green. They fall behind 17-7. But what happened in that game? You watched that game. Penn State guys said, okay, guys, it's enough of this. I'm going to go make this play. I'm going to go make this play. I'm going to make a play. I'm going to step up. I'm going to make this stop. I'm going to make this throw, make this block, make this tackle, make this run. Notre Dame never had that. I mean, and the crazy thing is the few guys that did step up and make plays outside of Xavier Watts they're young guys. Jaden Alsbury, Christian Gray, Jeremiah Love. The captains, none of them stepped up. They got 6 captains, and like not one of them stepped up and made a play in this game in a meaningful situation. And so you just kept waiting on it, right? You kept waiting on Notre Dame to do what Penn State did, which is, hey, look, we'll figure it out. We'll go make this play. And it just never happened. And that is the thing that, even looking beyond this game, is the most concerning part about it. Because you could just chalk this up to a bad week, and they played out of their minds, and we had some bad breaks, and you could look at it that way if you're a Notre Dame fan or if you're a Notre Dame coach, but it went beyond that, Mark. And I can, as a coach, I can clean up technical stuff and missed assignments and missed tackles and bad routes or bad throws, but when you just flat out don't compete and you get out physical and you just get out tough, I don't know how to fix that, especially when the week before you were the exact opposite. And that's what's so weird. Like, Florida State's a shocker, but Florida State played the same way in both games. I mean, they showed no heart. They showed no toughness. I mean, it's just, that's who they were. Notre Dame came out in the first week and had the best win so far, in my opinion, of the college football season, up until, outside of Texas going on the road and beating Michigan. I think Texas A&M's better than Michigan this year, but perception-wise, it's a better win. Michigan's certainly a more established team, and based on what they've done. And then for that team to show up a week later and do that, it's like, I don't know what the heck I'm watching here. Like, the teams that have been bad have just they're just not as good, right? And but for Notre Dame, it's like in 1 week you look like a legit title contender, or at least playoff contender. To the next week, you're like, dude, I don't know if they're going to beat Purdue the next week. And it's just, I don't know that I've ever experienced something like that before with a team that had the expectations that this team had.
You went straight to the destination that I was going to go to, Florida State. So there are obvious issues there that stem well beyond just, okay, we're getting beat up front. So leaving them alone, yes, because the team's going to do one of two things coming off what they suffered against Georgia Tech. They're either going to say it's going to be a wake-up call, they're going to get it together and get motivated and determined, or they're going to lack confidence. They're going to feel like this season's lost. They're going to start pointing fingers. They're going to do all those things that seem to be the indicator against Boston College. Okay, Notre Dame comes off this huge win. And even if they're patting themselves on the back or receiving all the pats on the back that they received from everyone, they've got everything to play for. Their season's in front of them. So even if they walk onto the stadium turf for the kickoff and they're a little less motivated, a little bit full of themselves, thinking Northern Illinois, we're good this week. What was the spread? 29. Of course, that number circulates. They know what that means. We're 4 touchdowns better than these guys, and we're just going to roll to a 42-10 win, and that's what it's going to be today. You would think after a series, 2, 3, that it kicks in that these guys are pretty good. The guy that's lining up in front of me, as you know better than I do, football's full of individual matchups. So Northern Illinois was obviously winning a ton of those individual matchups. Man, this dude that I've never heard of that's across from me that doesn't get to play on NBC or in prime time in front of millions of people every week, this dude's actually pretty good. Man, I got to respect this guy, and I better get going here. That just obviously never
happened.
took hold.
I mean, they were getting booed at halftime. It was 13-7 at halftime, and they were lucky to only be down 13-7. I mean, there's a couple plays you're like, whew, I don't know why Northern Illinois made that call. If they would have done this, maybe they could have. It could have been 17-7 or 21-7. And they're just, so you think, okay, they're only, man, as bad as that half was, they're only down 6. You come out in that first drive of the second half, make a stop, score, you put this team away. And that's kind of how it went. They did make a stop. They went down and scored. But even then, they didn't have, like, there was no change in emotion. There was no change in energy. They just had Jeremiah Love make a ridiculous run and made a couple plays where I think Bo Collins made a play on that series as well. And then it was right back to what had kind of happened all game. There was no shift in, hey, fellas, we got to figure this out, to your point. There was no – where were the leaders coaching-wise, player-wise? That's what makes it so hard to figure out, Mark, is and what makes it so discouraging is, I wrote on Sunday, I've been a very big supporter of Marcus Freeman and what I think he can do at Notre Dame and some of the things he has done at Notre Dame. And he's changed the narrative about Notre Dame in a lot of different ways, especially from a recruiting standpoint. But this isn't a one-off, unfortunately. And I don't mean one-off meaning you lost to a team like Northern Illinois. Unfortunately, they have. They've lost to Marshall's very similar to Northern Illinois. Stanford was worse than Northern Illinois, if we're being honest about it. That was a very bad football team. But it's more so how they lost, the part where you kind of get whooped in the trenches, where your team doesn't show up emotionally. You never punch back. You also had that last year against Duke. Now, you were able to kind of out-talent them at the end of the game. And let's be honest, Notre Dame caught a break in that game with that 4th and 16 scramble from Sam Hartman, and then Audric Estime busted open for the go-ahead run at the end of the game. You just had better dudes than they had. That's the reality of it. And then the next week against Louisville, just no fight, no punchback. And then we saw it again against Clemson, a Clemson team that I think had lost 2 in a row coming into that game and was missing 8 starters, just came and punched you in the mouth and you did nothing. That's the disconcerting thing. And the concerning thing is you can't just chalk it up to, it was just not their day. And, it's like App State beating Michigan in 2007, right? Like, just weird day. Just that wasn't Michigan's day. That was Appalachian State's day. But that was if I remember, that was a bit of an anomaly. Michigan wasn't losing those kind of games with any kind of consistency, right? And they went out and got smashed by an Oregon team the next week, and Michigan kind of figured it out for a little while. But, it's just we've seen this before, and I think that's a concerning thing. And there's nothing that they can do this weekend to make that go away, because I was talking to my dad earlier about this, and so look, they come out beat Purdue 50-0. That doesn't fix anything, because that's what they've done before. You get embarrassed by Louisville. You come out the next week and you obliterate USC. And then you obliterate Pittsburgh. And in a 2-game stretch, you outscore your opponents 106-27. Power 5 teams. One of them was undefeated, ranked number 10 in the country. And then you go lay down against Clemson. Right? And then what do they do after that? They go blow out Wake Forest by 38. They blow out Stanford by 33. They blow out Oregon State by 32. They go on the road and beat Texas A&M by 10. And then, boom, this happens again. Right? Like, that's what makes it so weird. And that's what Coach Freeman's going to have to figure out. Why is my team, and I talked about this before the season, I think you and I talked about this, why is there this roller coaster? Because the problem under Brian Kelly was they were always here. And here meant they were always going to beat the teams less than them, but they were never going to beat the teams or rarely beat the teams above them. Well, Marcus Freeman's the exact opposite. His team seems to get really up for the big games and really down and just completely sleepwalks through 2 or 3 games a year. And that can't happen. That I don't want either one of those. Like, I don't want Brian Kelly's way and I don't want Marcus Freeman's way. Coach Freeman's going to have to figure it out and say, look, what are we doing? What's the consistent pattern? And, there's certain things I can point to of why they did it, not practicing on Thursday. They had a walkthrough on Thursday. You have a very young football team in a lot of areas. You're playing a team that's very creative offensively. We spent all last week talking about that. You can't take a day of reps away from them. But it's not so much that, it's the mindset that went into making that decision that I think is the problem. And football players, but especially young people, Mark, need routine. They need to know that every Tuesday we're doing this, every Wednesday we're doing this, every Thursday we're doing this. And then you want to know why they don't play consistently, because you're always changing the theme. You're always changing, well, we're going to do this differently. We're going to do that differently. No, this is how we prepare. This is how we focus. We're going to treat every opponent the same, not like Brian Kelly where it's all business-like, but no, we are fired up to play every weekend because he says it's one life, one play, one life, or, this is one opportunity and we've got to bring, but they don't prepare that way. It's words right now for Marcus Freeman, and it needs to become action in who they are. And you got to prepare for Northern Illinois like you prepared for NC, like Texas A&M. Like, do you think in any world that in week 2, if you flipped opponents, played Northern Illinois at home in the opener, that they would have had a walkthrough on Thursday, getting ready to play Texas A&M in week 2? No way. No way. So you've sent the message to the players, hey, this isn't a team we have to worry about like the team last week. And they did.
Well, I'm going to find one positive in that, is that when you roll through how the team has bounced back, they have in fact bounced back under Marcus Freeman. You see a lot of teams tank that have superior talent, that have disappointing seasons, lose that one key game that sends it off the rails, at least logistically in the standings, that show, okay, our hope is lost, our tangible goals are gone, and a lot of teams lose it from there. I got to say, Brian, you touched on Brian Kelly here. We're not going to talk about Brian Kelly. You ran it down for us very well last week in regards to your thoughts about making that comparison. But I did take the temptation of, okay, just lost on Sunday. I was grabbing my notepad and I was, okay, I'm going to make sense out of this. I'm going to compare Marcus Freeman's results against bad teams versus Brian Kelly's. Then I'm going to take the top end teams and I'm going to and I'm going to go through the trends and everything. And then I thought, and I'm going to post a video because I'm going to figure this out. Did I post a video? No, because I just don't post videos just to do them, because I looked at it, and not just the scores, and this team was 9-3 and this team was 3-9, but try to give context to it, try to go back in my memory banks to recall situations and teams and how good they were, and was this team really better than a 7-6 team, on all that. And I thought, you know what? I don't have enough here to really make a fair evaluation of this. Let's sit on this for one more season and see what we have here. But like you said a minute ago, Marshall, Stanford, Northern Illinois, for a program like Notre Dame, that's way too many in the span of 2 seasons and 2 games. But and then on the Brian Kelly end of it, again, I'm not going to make this a conversation about Brian Kelly, but what I discovered that I still haven't made sense of to look at, really, again, this would be a fascinating conversation to have with you in the offseason, is to go through the archives and say, this is what I'm remembering as the national guy that tries to watch everyone that has a pretty good recollection of stuff, but it's not going to come anywhere close to yours. What am I missing, or what do I not remember about these games or these teams? But what I'm remembering based on looking at the records and seeing the scores and remembering, okay, I watched that game, but because what I was finding is Brian Kelly's record is a little bit better against quality opponents if you take away the rankings. I was just looking at, okay, how many 9-win teams have they played and what's their record? So again, I think it's an off-season conversation.
Yeah, there's two ways of looking at that, though, just real quick before we move on.
Yeah.
Number one is looking at ranked opponents, which can be misleading.
Yes.
And then, but you also can't ignore it. So, for example, I've talked, the two polar opposites for me is 2015 against Georgia Tech. You beat a 2-0, I think 13th or 15th ranked Georgia Tech team. They finished 3-9. They weren't very good. In 2013, you beat an unranked Michigan State team in a close game. Well, that team finished 13-1, and right, what was the better win? But you can't also ignore the ranking, because there is the mental part that goes into the game where your perception is that this is a big moment, right? And so there's a lot of different ways to look at that. So, but last 3 years of Brian Kelly's tenure, they were 5-5 against ranked opponents. Marcus Freeman's 8-4 against ranked opponents. But Brian Kelly didn't lose to Marshall. He didn't lose at home to a bad Stanford team. He didn't lose at home to. So it's like neither's good. Neither's good enough for Notre Dame. And Brian Kelly needed to figure out how to beat the best teams, and Marcus Freeman's going to have to figure out how to beat the worst teams. And that's basically what it comes down to. He's going to have to figure that out.
Folks, we appreciate you being here. We get Brian once a week. It's going to be on Wednesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern time. So make it a part of your college football calendar of content throughout the week. How healthy is Riley Leonard?
Not. I mean, the thing is, Notre Dame's not telling us anything. So all we have is the report from On3 that they heard from sources. I've talked to some people that I trust, and they've confirmed that this is also true, that he has a labrum problem on his left shoulder. I don't believe it was something that they I don't believe it's something that they are doing surgery on, obviously. And I'm told he's going to play, but that's a painful injury. And I know that they can put a shot in it and all that, but that's a painful injury. And so that's a concerning thing for me, because I mean, this is a guy whose game is built around being a dual threat. You take that away and he's not as effective. And so it's a concern. How, to the degree that he's injured, I don't know that, because all they're saying is he's not on our injury report and we expect him to play on Saturday. He's at practice. Okay, that doesn't tell me anything. But that's all we're getting from Notre Dame, because that's how, yeah.
It's funny you bring that up, Brian, because I don't know that anyone cares about my personal stories, but just on Monday, I was lifting some heavy weights for the first time in a long time with a buddy of mine, and I was on the bench and I was bringing it back from probably too deep, and I exploded. And yeah, I felt and I heard, and I didn't tear it to an extreme, or I wouldn't be sitting here with no issue, but I did to a certain extent, because it's bruised. It's bruised my foot. Like I did something, and range of motion is like that compared to that right now. And yeah, so I can relate to that to a certain extent. And if that was on my throwing shoulder, forget it.
It was not his throwing shoulder. That's the one thing. It was his non-throwing
Okay.
shoulder. If it was his throwing shoulder, he'd be done.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way. I played quarterback. There's no way. No way. Nick, can I respond to something real quick? Someone in the chat says, Driscoll calls A&M a good win. Well, they are unranked, so stop playing these games. I said very clearly, ranked I said there's a difference. I made very clear. You have to evaluate certain wins for how good a team is. Example, Michigan State, when they're unranked, but they were actually a good win. And then the other part is you have to look at teams where they were. When A&M and Notre Dame played each other, they were ranked. Right? I said very clear there's two types of wins. So you not understanding that's not a me problem. I'm being very consistent. I said there's two ways of looking at it. I just want to make sure we're clear, because apparently he didn't hear what I said. I said it's when they play, when they're ranked, you have to look at it that way, but then also be able to go back and look at it and see what was the quality of the opponent at the end of the year, which is why I've always given Brian Kelly credit for beating a really good Michigan State team, even though technically it was over an unranked team. So there's two ways you got to evaluate that when you're looking at a football team. The problem with Marcus Freeman is in the moments where it's considered a big game, his team tends to play well. When it's not considered a big game, his teams don't. And that's the problem. And that's what has to be addressed.
The game being selected for the ABC Fowler Herb Street game on a Saturday night gives some indication to it being a quality game, number one, and not that I put my stock solely in that, but we all know Texas A&M's talent and their recruiting. We know how good Mike Elko is. That's Texas A&M may finish the season 9-3. They may be 5-7.
They may go 3-9.
They may go 3-9. I'm going to guess they're going to be 7-5 or 8-4 would be.
Right.
I would actually put money on one of those two records right now.
Right.
They're a good team.
But this is the point, and this is what needs to be understood. Had Notre Dame played against Northern Illinois with the same focus and intensity that they played against Texas A&M, are they 1-1 right now, or are they 2-0 right now? They're 2-0 right now. And that's the point. I'm not defending Marcus Freeman. I actually think this is worse than always being here. This is worse because now you don't know. You knew what to expect from Brian Kelly. If they were playing an unranked team, they were going to win. You didn't worry about games like this. When they played a good team, you were like, not sure they'll probably win if they're like 15-25. If they played a top 10 to 15 team, they were most likely going to lose a lot of times. That's just how it was. The thing that's frustrating about this one is you don't know what team's going to show up from week to week. Because 3 weeks after losing to a 3-9 Marshall team, whose wins were over Colgate and a 1-point win over, I think, Washington State, their only other win was Notre Dame. 3 weeks later, you beat number 4 Clemson by 3 touchdowns. 2 weeks after losing to Marshall, you go blow out Drake May in North Carolina, who won 9 games and played in the ACC championship. That's the frustrating part. This isn't a defense. That's actually bad. I don't like that. You've got to fix that. And that's the point.
Folks, we've done this now for a third week, and we knew that it might be a slow ride here in regards to building an audience. We're on the Notre Dame channel. We're pushing 3,000 views on the last live stream, so people are finding it after the fact, but we would love to build up the live audience here at the Voice of College Football. So tell your friends, your family, bring 1 or 2 or 50 with you. We're going to do this every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We do an Iowa show, Brian, on Tuesdays, and our buddy Corey Bratta gave a very sound synopsis of coaching blunders, timing issues, game management, play calls inside the 5-yard line that didn't make sense, et cetera, et cetera. And I checked him off. I tried to challenge him, but it was pretty airtight. Some of it was, okay, there's a debate on both sides of the coin, but most of it was pretty airtight. Having not seen most of the Notre Dame game, were those, so your issue with the coaching is the overall preparation. Were there game management type of decisions or schematic issues that you had with this game?
To a degree. I mean, Notre Dame's overall offensive game plan was very dry. I didn't love that. They didn't run Riley Leonard a whole lot. Come to find out, it's most likely because he had the labrum issue. I would imagine that's why they backed out on that. But there's some clock management issues late in the game, letting the clock run down to the 2-minute warning. I personally would rather have used the timeout than use the 2-minute warning. That's just more of a personal preference for me as an offensive coach. I'd rather have more time and less timeouts than less time and more timeouts. It's just maybe Mike Denbrock's different. Maybe the PFF guy that's the analytics guy next to him is that. But end of the day, it was more so just about execution. One of the, for example, my biggest beef is probably late in the game on the play where he threw the late interception. It was 2nd and 1. You're near midfield. I think they're at the 49-yard line. They took a shot, and it got picked off. Well, you can't throw the ball there. It's like, okay, I don't have a problem with the shot. I think 2nd and 1 at midfield's a great time to take a shot. And even if you get picked, you think the type of shot I would take, it's going to be downfield. You get tackled. They got to go. I'm not saying I want to pick, but the issue wasn't so much that they took a shot that I have a problem with, because that's easy, right? When a play doesn't work, then stupid play call. Like every call that doesn't work was a bad play call. No, it wasn't executed well, but sometimes it was a bad play call. But it wasn't the taking the shot that was the bad play call, in my opinion. It was what they called. And here's the example I'm talking about, Mark. You got to, as a football coach, you got to read the room. You got to be able to look in the eyes of your players and say, this guy doesn't have it today, or this guy has it, or this guy's hot, right? Let's keep calling sets to get him the ball, or keep calling plays to get him the ball. Or, hey, my quarterback is really struggling to make reads today. He's got happy feet. He's not letting the ball loose. He's aiming everything. He's not comfortable. What you don't do in that situation is run a double post with a backside smash and ask him to read double post. That's not an easy read or an easy ball. What you do is you line up in 12 personnel, you motion your tight end in, get their safety down, and you say, I got 2 one-on-one go routes on the outside. Pick which one you like best, step back, 3-step, boom, let her rip. It's either incomplete or it's a catch. And then if you don't get it, you're a 3rd and short. But to make that call and ask a struggling quarterback to throw the ball over the middle of the field, now he made the wrong read. He did. If he throws it to Jaden Greathouse, it's probably a completion. But the point is, that's not an easy read for a guy that's struggling to read defenses right now. He has no confidence in the offense right now. He has no confidence in himself right now. And he's completely in that. He almost got picked on a comeback route 2 plays before. Like you've got to have a better read of your room. That's a call that I thought was a mistake. Not throwing deep, but that specific call. And there was a couple plays like that, but at the end of the day, they get the ball in Notre Dame territory with 5 minutes left, and you've got supposedly one of the best defenses in college football, and you can't keep them. They needed 2 first downs to get into field goal range, at least, and you couldn't stop them. So that's why I keep saying is like, yeah, the offense was a major problem, but the defense had chances to overcome the offense's issues, and they couldn't get it done. So it was a team loss, and a very disappointing team loss, and it's frustrating.
Brian Driscoll here, breaking down Notre Dame football. And yes, Irish Breakdown. It makes sense. So get on over there, check out Brian's work and the rest of the crew at Irish Breakdown. It's 1 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday with Brian. And you guys do a show later in the day, correct?
I don't. My team does. Sean Stiers, and he's on either with Vince D'Addario or his son Jesse. They do a show at 5 o'clock. IB Nation Sports Talk at 5 o'clock, Monday to Thursday.
Excellent. The most I've ever been impressed that I can think of with Hudson Card is a game that he played against Alabama when Alabama was Alabama and Texas was nothing close to what they are now, or so we thought, but they had the makings with Sark as the head coach a couple of years ago in Austin, a game that Ryan Watts hadn't made a dumb hit on, no, wasn't a penalty. He whiffed on Bryce Young in the backfield, would have ended the game. He would have had a 12-yard sack. That would have thrown him back. They don't win. Bama wins at the gun in Austin. But Quinn Ewers got his first big start in that game. That was his second start overall. Looked great in the first quarter, gets knocked out of the game. Hudson Card comes in, had been the part-time starting quarterback at Texas for a couple of years at that point. Rolls an ankle, guts it out, almost beats Bama, plays the entire game minus his best asset as a quarterback, and gutted it out. He was obviously paired with a rookie head coach last year in Ryan Walters. Things didn't look great. They had a tough non-conference schedule. They finished 4-8. They've got a week to prepare with a bye week leading into this one. They rolled Indiana State 49-0. Devin Maccabee's a guy that's been at Purdue for quite some time as a bit of a bowling ball running back. This is a renewal of what has been a long-standing rivalry that many of us, the focus is on when are they going to play Michigan, when are they going to play Michigan State. But for those of us who also enjoyed the Purdue games back in the day, we like to see this one get going. So based on what you've seen on tape, what do you think of these Boilers?
Well, first of all, my order of preferred opponents in that 3 is Michigan State, Purdue, Michigan, and then Michigan. Look, there's good and bad to this matchup, Mark, and here's what I mean by that. They are a big physical team. They are very big in the trenches. They are a true 3-4 defense. Like you even watch them when you go spread out, they're still going to have their 3-4 personnel on the field in the first and second down. They've got really 3 big D linemen, 2 long, athletic edge players, a 255-pound middle linebacker. Their small guy is Yanni Karloftis at 6'3", 235. That's their small guy in their front seven. Not super, super talented outside of a couple guys, but they're big, they're veterans, and they're outside of Will Help, they're very experienced, and they play hard. And same thing on their offensive line. They're slightly bigger than Northern Illinois is. So you look at the matchup and you say, well, this is an issue that Notre Dame has been having. They've been getting beat in the trenches the first 2 weeks, especially this past week against Northern Illinois. And this is a Purdue team that when Purdue started getting better late in the year, Mark, and they've now won 3 of their last 4 games under Ryan Walters, it's because they finally started really running the football and having success running the football. And they obviously ran the football well in the opener. And they're going to watch Notre Dame and say, hey, they can get run on. And so Notre Dame is going to get tested in the same exact areas where they struggled the first 2 games, especially this past week. So that's the concerning part of this matchup. They are a pretty good run defense, or at least they were late in the year. They weren't very good early in the year, but in the last 4 games, I think the math I came up with earlier, Mark, is they were something like they've given up like 114 yards per game rushing at the end of last year in their last 4 games. That includes holding Michigan to, I'm looking at it now, 3.2 yards per carry and only 110 rushing yards in the game against them last year. So it's not like they did it against, all bottom dwellers, because this is what he's building to. This is what he did at Illinois, right? It's shut down the run, and they're willing to give you some matchups on the perimeter, but we're going to make sure you don't run the football on us. Well, for Notre Dame, that's been kind of kryptonite so far the first couple games. And so that's the concerning part of the matchup. The positive is, Mark, is if you get those parts of your game going, your run defense plays really well on Saturday, you run the ball well, then you earned it against what's the best part of Purdue's team. And so that's the encouraging part of it, is they're going to test you where you are struggling. So you're going to find out if you got better, because sometimes you can struggle against something and your next 4 opponents aren't good at that, so you don't really get tested. They play to your strengths, and so you improve and you get better. But then the next time, 5 games later, you play a team that's really good at what you're not good at, you get exposed again. Well, Notre Dame's going to find out real quick if they've been able to make some adjustments and make some changes, because Purdue is going to come at them the same way Northern Illinois did. A lot of different looks on offense, a lot of motion shifts, trying to get leverage, spacing, getting your backs out in space, getting your receivers out in space. They're going to run the ball between the tackles. They're going to come and stretch at you. They're going to try to get some of your kickouts that worked so well last week on you. They've got decent sized backs. They're not huge, but neither was Ontario Brown. And they've got a quarterback that's a mobile quarterback. I wouldn't call him a dual threat guy, but he's a good athlete that can scramble when needed to. He can move the chains if he needs to. And so you're going to be presented with a lot of issues that have been a problem for your football team here for the first 2 weeks, which makes it concerning on one end, but then also like, okay, if they step up and play well and do what they should, then it tells you that they got better, and they got better quickly. And they, at least for 1 week, figured it out.
Notre Dame back on CBS for the first time, and it's got to be forever, taking on Purdue as a 10.5-point favorite for a guy that likes the numbers. I'm not a gambling guy. I've not put money on a game in 10 years, but I do like the numbers. I enjoy the math of it and the trying to beat the man in Vegas. So I'm foolish enough to make predictions every week and make them available for all of you to make fun of me when I miss as many as I did last week. But Notre Dame at 10.5, that's going to be a tough call for me, I got to say. 10.5 on the road. I was thinking it was going to be a little bit higher than that, and I was going to safely take Purdue, but I'm going to be wavering back and forth on this one. I was thinking maybe
after watching Notre Dame the last 2 weeks, I would probably just keep my money. Because we don't really know what Purdue is yet, right? Like, they played a really bad FCS team.
Yep.
And, I thought they looked good. They've got some decent talent, but with this Notre Dame team, you'd have no clue what to expect. Which team's going to show up? The one that showed up against A&M or the one that showed up against Northern Illinois? I have no idea. No idea.
We've got a college football show hosted by me every morning, folks, at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So lock it in on the main channel there, 10 a.m. Eastern every Monday through Friday with me. And like I don't have enough shows to host, we're premiering our Ole Miss live show Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time with Leanne Herring from the Rebel Walk. So that's going to be a good time. Ole Miss live. That's over on the SEC and the Ole Miss channels. Brian, what's going on there at Irish Breakdown this week?
Oh, just a lot of venting this week, to be honest with you. Tomorrow we'll do our prediction show and we'll do our Keys to Victory show. And Friday we'll have a mailbag. But today I kind of went through the game records for both teams, that guys that could really turn this game around. I kind of gave an overview of Purdue. I actually like what Ryan Walters is doing. He's recruited a lot of size. They're big and strong. Their receivers fit their offense. They're all like 6'3", 6'4", 200 plus pounds, that kind of thing. And just kind of going through that, just trying to figure out what this team is going to be, what this team is going to do. So it makes it a little challenging to evaluate this football team and get people excited about this football team, because it's just hard for people to get that taste from Saturday out of their mouth. And I got to be honest, like normally you get real mad about it on game day. Then Sunday you get really frustrated because you start watching the film and all that. But by Wednesday you've moved on and you're ready for the next opponent. And a lot of fans aren't ready to move on yet. And I can't blame them. I was talking to my dad about that today. I was like, God, I'm still kind of ticked about that game. And it's not that they lost, it's just the way that they lost, just the no compete level. So just trying to move on past it. But then, something comes up in the show that kind of triggers me to start talking about the game again and the frustration from the game. But it's been a challenge, but we're just kind of powering through. We did yesterday. We talked about what's at stake for Notre Dame this weekend and talked about what we need to see and the fact that they got to get quarterback figured out. I don't care what they decide to do, fix Riley Leonard, go to Angeli, go to one of the young guys. I don't care what it is, but you need to figure it out and get that position going. And then, like I said, tomorrow we'll dive deeper into, the specific keys to victory. And then we'll do our game predictions.
And for guys like you that have to take on the onslaught of not just the fan base, but all the opposing fan bases as well, that just the name Northern Illinois, regardless of people actually taking into account how good the team is, that's going to stay with this program for a few years, just like Marshall has, etc.
Yeah, well, it depends on, and it should. To be honest with you, I mean, it should stick with you. Like, look, I think I said last week, it's a very good football team. This team's not going to be afraid of Notre Dame. They're very well coached. They're going to do this, going to do that. They're very experienced, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's all true, but it still doesn't justify Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois. Like, there's no excuse. There's no, but this happened, and you got to think about this and their experience. This is a really good Group of 5 school that has no business being competitive with Notre Dame for 4 quarters. That's the reality. Like that there's just, so the only thing that's going to kind of make it go away is you're going to have to go on a very long run the rest of this year that includes at least one huge postseason win, meaning like you're going to have to beat somebody really good and at least be in the semifinals because you knocked off Georgia in the quarters or something like that. That's the only thing I think they can do to put this game completely in the rearview mirror, in my opinion. Because nobody really talks about the fact that in 2016, I do, Clemson got beat at home in November by an 8-5 Pitt team. Like, nobody talks about that. Why? Because they won the championship. So who cares? You know what I mean? And so that's kind of the way you look at it. It's like, hey, they won the title, so that's what you talk about. They just had an off day, right? When but that's the kind of success you need for people to forget about it. And honestly, you brought this on yourself if you're Notre Dame. I mean, you did lose to Northern Illinois. Georgia didn't. Ohio State didn't. Ohio State destroys MAC teams regularly, but Notre Dame didn't. They got beat. And this isn't like Ben Roethlisberger's Miami of Ohio either, right? You know what I mean? Like, it's not that. But Notre Dame's had now 3 clunkers against MAC teams, Mark. And it's frustrating because they beat a bad Ball State team 24-16 in 2018. They needed Jack Cohn to save them late in the 4th quarter to beat Toledo. And that was an okay Toledo team. I think they were like 7-6 or something like that, and then you go out and get beat by a Northern Illinois. So it's just it's very frustrating, very frustrating.
Well, Brian, hopefully you can get past it. But again, when the expectations are what they are at Notre Dame, yeah, the Purdue win's not going to do it, or whomever after. It's going to take an accumulation of wins or reaching a goal of the playoff and maybe a playoff win to get to that place in terms of evening out what we saw last Saturday.
It's like, and it's got to be a playoff win over somebody that people respect. Not like you got to the playoff and played Memphis in the first round. Yeah, Memphis is a good football team, but like that's not the kind of. And then you get the Big 12 champ in round 2 and you beat them. It's like, okay, nobody cares. It's got to be like, oh, you played Bama and beat Bama. Oh, okay. Or oh, you played Texas and beat Texas. Or you played Ohio. It's got to be something like that, because otherwise it's like, yeah, okay, but you couldn't do this. Yeah,
that is the standard. Brian, appreciate you doing this. I know you got a lot going on, and again, it's a whole lot of fun for me to learn more about Notre Dame football, and obviously to slice it up with you.
Thanks for having me on, Mark.
See everybody next week, 8 p.m. Eastern time. Make this a staple for your college football week, and we'll see you next week.